Welcome everybody to this session here at the virtual edition of the Singapore FinTech Festival. As Wiki said, my name is John Rout. I work for a company called Digital Asset. Today, what we're hoping to do is drive a bit of a practical discussion, something that really focuses on the journey to production that everybody goes through as they start to adopt new smart contract-based technologies, but with a particular focus in on the emerging demands that we're seeing amongst customers in the marketplace for deployment flexibility and interoperability amongst these solutions. It's become quite clear over the past couple of years, as lots of different blockchains have started to emerge, that it's unlikely that there'll be one blockchain to rule them all. As such, there is a need to be able to deploy on demand to address specific use cases and to stitch together different blockchains in order to achieve business outcomes. Along the way of our discussion this afternoon, what we're really going to get into is what do customers really want, and what are the sorts of pitfalls and lessons that organizations that are starting to adapt and adopt this technology within their organizations have learned along the way. I'm fortunate to have been joined in our discussion this afternoon by a couple of very distinguished panelists that span across market infrastructures, security services firms, and also technology platform operators, all of whom we're very happy to say are using DAML smart contracts. So today, I'd like you all to welcome Peter Shen, who's the head of digital services for fixed income currencies and commodities at SGX. Jesslyn Tan, managing director and global head of product management for security services at Deutsche Bank. Mandy Shin, digital transformation officer for Asia Pacific for BNP Paribas Securities Services. And Yifan Hay, who's the CEO of Red Date Technologies. So I'm going to jump straight into it, and really what we're going to look at through the course of the conversation is provide a bit of context about what these different organizations that are on the panel with us today are doing, what are the kinds of business outcomes that they're looking to achieve, and then try to zero in on why interoperability matters for each of them. Now, for each of them, it's slightly different, but we want to really understand what is the context within which these applications are being deployed. Finally, we'll start to look at the question of technology choices. Why did they pick the tech stack that they did, and where do they think this technology is going to go in the future? So to kick things off, I'd like to ask you, Mandy, can you talk a little bit about what BNP Paribas Security Services is doing with smart contracts, and particularly your focus in around smart elections and corporate actions?
Sure, thank you, John. And first of all, thank you so much for having me in this exciting panel. So when we look at where to apply smart contract, taking the learnings from Singapore, Australia, and Hong Kong exchanges, we look at complex process where we are not fully automated yet. And this is where the idea of smart elections came into our picture. So the focus of the smart election solution is to automate our complex process and standing instruction for corporate action election. So take an example of dividend reinvestment plan. This event gives an election choice for investors to take securities or cash as a dividend. And as an investor, of course, you would like to take the most current market information to make this decision. However, today, investors need to submit their decision 1 day before the market deadline. And it is because we have challenges in security services where global custodians need to communicate with the local custodians and then communicate back again with the market to process the election instruction. So this type of sequential processing and data silo means heavy reconciliation work and latency before the market deadline. And so for us in BNP Paribas to address this pain point, we are developing a smart election solution. So we use smart contract technology to create a single source of truth and a shared workflow for multiple parties involved in a corporate action processing. So it is a shift from sequential processing to a much more efficient concurrent processing of corporate action election. So with this concurrent processing, we can significantly close the gap between the investor and client deadline and the market deadline for election decision. So with this smart election solution, our investors can gain two benefits. So first of all, of course, our investors can make the optimal investment strategy by making the final election decision much, much closer to the market deadline based on the more current information. And secondly, this smart contract can help create and automate much more complex standing instruction using the previously known decision logic, like measuring events, the price and the market conditions to make this election process for our clients even more efficient and straight through, I'll say. And I also want to highlight that Smart Election Platform, this solution is just one of the initial applications that we are building. And we look to actually develop much more solutions today powered by smart contracts to increase the level of our process automation and bring further benefits to our clients.
Excellent. Security services, an opportunity to start to parallelize workflows that are currently sequential. Exactly. And starting to automate complex logic. That's really where yes. BNP Paribas is seeing the opportunity.
Yeah, exactly.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Shifting gears a little bit, Yifan, could I just turn to you and ask a little bit? I'm sure many of the people in the audience today have heard about the service network, but can you tell us a little about what you're hoping to achieve with it and who the members of the blockchain-based service network are?
Okay. The BSN, basically blockchain-based service network. BSN is we started the BSN project 2 years ago with State Information Center of China and the China Mobile and the China UnionPay. The reason we started the whole thing is 2 years ago we saw that the blockchain technology is really another information revolution. Okay, it's a total upgrade of the internet, but there were two problems for the blockchain industry. The first one is the cost. The cost. I mean, 2 years ago, not 2 years ago, even this year, if you build a private chain in China, 3 peers, it costs you probably $20,000. Okay, it's way too high for any individual and a small medium company to try this new technology. So right now we spent 2 years to develop a BSN. Right now in China, if you build your own private chain on BSN, it only costs $200 per year. So now we see a lot of individual and a small company try this new technology. So that's a big step. And the second problem we saw 2 years ago is we consider no matter it's public chain or private chain, it's like the intranet of the early 90s of the internet. So it's just an intranet. Every public chain or private chain has their own business logic, but they don't really talk to each other. So that's why we want to build the BSN into a big environment and integrating all the chains on BSN. So make the chain, each chain, the smart contract on any chain to call another smart contract on any other chain. It's makes that much easier. Like 5 lines of codes. So we launched we call that interchain communications hub of BSN last month. So right now you can build a fabric chain and use that smart contract and to call a US smart contract, or you can on Ethereum and use a smart contract. As long as that node is on BSN, you can use the smart contract on a public chain and call a fabric chain smart contract. So it's already done on BSN. So that's actually the interoperability. I mean, you can build the interoperability. Everybody can build that. The question is the cost. It takes you 20,000 lines to achieve that, or you use just 3 lines of code to achieve that. So that's basically BSN is. We reduce the cost and lower the barrier, for anyone to access the blockchain technology. And second one, makes the interoperability as easy as possible.
That's got to be the word of 2020. Sorry, you're on mute. So I'm going to go back to it. Another interesting use case, but obviously from a pure technology perspective, trying to create a unified environment for developers where everything is at their fingertips at a low and reasonable cost so they can get started quickly, and where where smart contracts can live anywhere. That makes a lot of sense. Peter, from your perspective, obviously this being the Singapore FinTech Festival, I'm sure many of the audience are going to be very familiar with the work that SGX has done alongside Temasek and HSBC this year. But could you give us a little bit more insight into the goals that your organisation and HSBC and Temasek had for the project and where you see this thing going?
Yeah, sure. First, John, thanks very much for the invite. Very happy to be here. And of course, very happy to have worked with the demo and the digital asset team over the years. So I think when we first started this project, it was on the back of many projects, right? So we had been working with MAS on Ubin since 2016. Work in 2018, we did a project on the interoperability between ledgers, and we filed a patent on that. And I think coming to 2019 and of course this year, I think the thought was, can we take what we have done and build something commercial out of it? And can we pick an asset class and transform it on some level so that we can actually show that this technology has value? So in order to do that, I think we decided to pick fixed income. So I think, as all of you know, we chose an asset class that has not really been electronified. So there's a lot of paper, there's a lot of voice and spreadsheets, and it's pretty much the way that the market structure has been over the years. So the idea was, can we take all this information in disparate places, this pretty fragmented data model that exists today, and leverage smart contracts to automate some of that and create real value for issuers and investors? So I think if you think about the business of an exchange, or even as a bank, or even as a market infrastructure, we really have to try to bring the issuers closer to the investors, right? And how do we do that, right? There are many ways we can do that. I think a lot of the digitalization efforts have been focused on that. But in this particular project, we tried to take all the workflows that today take place in paper, emails, phone calls, and automate and consolidate them using a smart contract language. And we picked DAML for good reason. I think it's very easy to model financial rights and obligations using DAML. And with that, we were able to consolidate and optimize and automate a lot of the workflows that today take a lot of time. So if you look at the outcomes, we managed to shorten from T+5 to T+2. And we managed to do a lot of things. Of course, we can go much further, but this is not a unilateral improvement, right? So you have to do this together with the industry. So incremental change is something that we're trying to do, and I think we managed to demonstrate that by taking one component of DLT, which is the smart contracts, we're able to drive a lot of value into the ecosystem, right? So I think that's how I summarize the project in a nutshell. I think it's just the beginning. I think we've only scratched the surface of what this can do. We are certainly blockchain ready, but we haven't used it in this first phase simply because it's not needed now. But as we scale up, I think there's definitely value to look at how we can distribute some of this data, right? And I really echo what Ifan said about cost, right? You really need to look at blockchain. You know, it's an interesting technology. It's still nascent. I personally am very bullish about it, but as of today, it's still fairly complex and expensive to use, right? So and it'll get better, and by which time I think we'll all be able to use it in a more meaningful way, right? So I think that's how I would put this project. Hand it back to you, John. I can talk forever about this, but we'll let others have their say as well.
No, that's excellent. Thank you, Peter. And I think it's a really interesting point that you touched on, something that we're going to definitely drill into over the course of this panel, about that journey and the steps along the path from centralized to distributed, moving from the status quo today to where we're going tomorrow, and what are the thresholds that you need to get as we get there. So very keen to keep talking about that as we as we go a bit further along today. Jesslyn, though, I'm hoping before we do that to hear a bit about what Deutsche Bank has been doing. Can you talk to us about the opportunity that you've been focused on and where you see smart contracts impacting your business?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, John, and thanks to MAS for the invitation. Very happy to be here, joined by our fellow panelists. So definitely the benefits I see in smart contract is very aligned to what Mandy shared earlier, really about reducing the sequential processing, single source of truth. And for me, when I look at the single source of truth, it's not the truth within one organization, but what is the source of truth that can be shared and benefits the entire industry. We are not there yet, but like what Peter shared, is taking incremental steps. So the opportunity in Deutsche Bank came up when we had the shareholders' rights disclosure and some of the directives that came in, and we had to disclose beneficial ownership details. So in today's environment, a lot of this information is either collated manually, partially in spreadsheets, in documents, or in mini databases. And if there's an investor who needs to sort of declare, we call it BO for short, for beneficial owner, imagine the investor having to disclose it to the asset manager or the fund manager, then it goes down the chain to the global custodian, the sub-custodian, and then the authorities. How much processing is it done in that space that's sequential and very error-prone? So we thought of using the smart contract that really addresses the problem that we have today by creating the beneficial ownership details using smart contract. And lo and behold, after we started the first deployment, completed the prototype, we realized there's a greater benefit of using a smart contract that can be easily expanded. So in the process, we have now created stock ledgers in our organization using smart contract as well. So imagine having to have different applications keeping track of the positions of a ledger. Why do we need to duplicate? Why do we have to recreate all these whatever simple or duplicate information in all of these systems? Can we not leverage on smart contract, create, and then the data can then be consumed by all of these multiple applications? So that's where I really see the benefit and the use of smart contracts. Not quite into DLT yet. We can talk about interoperability at some point later, but it's definitely the first step into that direction.
Just carefully unmuting myself this time. Okay, no, that's very helpful, Jesslyn. Thank you. And I think it's clear that across Peter, Mandy, and yourself, there's definitely a common thread in security services and the handling of asset classes as they go through their life cycles, that there is a need to keep everybody in sync over clear bits of information. So I think the application of smart contracts in the capital market space for fintech is quite clear. But each of you in your own ways have sort of touched on this question of how do you deploy it and how do you realize the sorts of benefits that we're talking about, whether we're talking about speeding up corporate actions elections, smoothing the process of issuing bonds, or evidencing ultimate beneficial owner type information. Obviously, your fund comes at it from a completely different perspective, which is to say that as a technology platform facing developers, how can you make that as easy as possible to cross across these trust boundaries and these information silos that exist today? But in all of that, we're talking about how do you deploy this stuff? How do you realize that value? And so, Mandy, I might come back to you and just ask, for this smart elections use case that you're zeroed in on as your first one, of course, why does interoperability matter? And how does that fit with what BNP Paribas Security Services is doing across the region?
Sure. It's a great question. Thank you for asking a very great question, John. I really echo what everyone says about the phased approach and incremental steps here. So if you see today, most of our processes is already quite efficient and automated, but there's just still some remaining portion of process that could be further automated, but not yet because of its complexity. So our vision here today at BNP Paribas is to increase the level of automation of our existing operation, but not lose the existing automation we have achieved so far. So we want to do it by taking a hybrid approach that is about adopting a new tech that is compatible with the well-working legacy process and platform. So this approach would allow market participants to assess and prioritize the changes that are going to bring to them the maximum value at a comfortable pace. So they can be very comfortable on how they move. So with this vision, interoperability, of course, is absolutely a key to support diverse spectrum of market actors and also facilitate scaling up. So we try to really seize the new opportunities enabled by the new technology in a phased approach. So one of the key services as security services provider we need to be able to provide to our clients is to shield them from the underlying technology differences. So our clients should be able to communicate with us and interact with us the way they want while we continue to further improve client service and operational efficiency. So when we are thinking about building our smart election platform, and then when we are designing it, interoperability is really at the heart of our design principle. So that we really make sure that our smart election platform and more other smart contract powered applications to be able to run interoperably to the new and legacy infrastructures. And we should be flexible for our different clients and the market requirements. So at the end, having interoperability in place will take the pressure and complexity away from our clients by bringing different options to onboard in the new services. So that's how we see it, and that's why interoperability is absolutely a key topic when we talk about applying new technologies like smart contract.
Very interesting. So I suppose for you, you're saying that interoperability is not just about one blockchain and other blockchains. It's also about blockchains talking to legacy infrastructure and talking to people the way that they're used to communicating with each other today. That makes a lot of sense. Jesslyn, you sort of touched on a similar point about your journey in your response to the first question. I understand that you're sort of looking at a two-phased approach to how you might roll out your smart contract-based application at Deutsche Bank. Can you give us a bit more of an insight into what you're thinking about and what your plans are there?
Sure. So the beneficial ownership smart contract and the database I spoke about earlier, it's truly beneficial if the entire industry comes together, operates on the DLT technology. But however, we are not there yet because we do recognize that different players progress, operate at different paces, and not everybody is actually ready for that. However, I firmly believe in the benefits of that, and therefore implementing internally in-house first, we can sort of test the water, be agile, deploy it, and since it's a new technology, it's a bit of trial and error too, right? So if you don't try it, you never learn, you never know. So that's why we wanted to take that approach and look at deploying in-house first, and at some point then expand to the industry. So we started with demo at the beginning and recognizing that quite a couple of months ago, maybe a year ago, demo had an integrated database. That's not quite the state that we want to get to because it doesn't address the interoperability challenge. Because if another industry player were to come in, they can't be operating on exactly the same infrastructure. However, we recognize that demo definitely has planned to sort of like have an open source and let the whole application interact with a distributed ledger. So rather than to wait for that to happen, we wanted to sort of get the benefits that I outlined earlier by doing an internal deployment, and therefore we had a phased approach. We've actually now done that, and the next phase for us is to definitely publish some of the data, moving the demo application onto a distributed ledger, for example, like Corda, so that when the other industry players are ready, the data can be easily shared on the node on the DLT, so that we will share the information and not having different parties duplicate the information. That's the whole essence of what the whole DLT brings about. And with that, we have done a successful prototype and we're about to go into production, definitely in-house in Deutsche Bank in January. The solution also has to be scalable and replicable. So therefore, we'll be kept very, very busy in 2021, scaling and replicating the whole solution throughout all the locations that security services operate in.
I just want to ask a follow-up question there. You touched on moving from a centralized to a distributed type environment. does that mean for you the ability to write the application once and then run it in different places has been quite important?
Yes, certainly, because we chose demo also because of the ease of some of the codes. So we don't have to rewrite the codes even if you were to change the database, right? Unlike some of the traditional or the legacy applications out there, the moment you change a database, imagine the whole long haul complex of rewriting the codes. So therefore, this was one of the reasons why we also chose demo, because when we actually change the operating database by moving into distributed ledger, we can just plug the whole application quite easily onto the new database itself.
Excellent. Okay, thank you, Jessalyn. Peter, coming to you, you obviously touched on Project Dubin before, and I'd say going right back to phase 2 of Project Dubin several years ago, Singapore has long realized that interoperability amongst blockchains, between firms, between environments, was critical to the success of this technology. I wanted to ask you about the sorts of new lessons that you learned working alongside HSBC, the rough architecture of the applications that were built, and why interoperability still matters today in 2020.
Yeah, okay, thanks, John. I think there are a couple of things that I will discuss, I think, but primarily I think it is probably idealistic to think that there will be only one blockchain in the world. There will be many, for now. And I think there is a need to look at different architectures that meet each different needs. So I have a view, which is based on what I've seen so far, is that there are all different networks coming up, right? And these are private blockchains. At some point, you may or may not see some convergence with them. If there isn't, then you will have a higher degree of interoperability. If there's more convergence, then you may have to work with one or two networks. That's fine. But that I think the jury is still out on that. We don't know how that will pan out. There's a lot of factors at play, starting from the technology itself. It's still a nascent technology, like having worked with the code directly, some of it actually doesn't work yet, right? There's still a lot of work to be done. And even and there's of course commercial perspectives, there's geopolitical perspectives in there as well. So that will take some time to evolve. I think lessons learned over the years with this particular technology is that as with any early stage technology, you have to know exactly what you're working with. I think the unfortunate thing I find is that a lot of people who are talking about this technology haven't actually worked with it. So we tend to develop echo chambers, like you talk to this and we all agree it's great and it's great and it's great, but we're not critical enough about it to improve it. So amongst those of us who believe in this technology, we ought to be more critical about it so that we can actually drive it forward, rather than keep trying to play the same song again and again. And we really have to examine each of blockchain's claims in detail, like reconciliation. Are there actually any savings from that? Does distributing a ledger mean a reduction in reconciliation? That's not a question for technology to answer, right? So we've covered this many times with many of the banks. As you know, I think our project has gone quite far, and we will continue to. There's the issuance pipeline, of course. The bond that is known is only the one that's known. There's been a couple of other issuances as well, and there are more upcoming. And we're talking to banks to see how they would like to interact with us. So at first, it's not going to be a single bank thing, just as it won't be a single exchange thing. We will have to link up with other people, right? So I think that's one part of the lesson learned, is to be open and to be critical of the technology and to be aware of its limitations for now. In fact, I think what China is doing at the BSN is probably the right approach, in my view, to make it low cost, cheap and accessible. And as opposed to some of these big techs who are trying to commercialize it, it's pretty expensive the way I've seen them do it, right? So that will limit adoption, right? And I think the second part of this is, as we look at workflow automation, we really have to think about a few things. One of which is a lot of the complexity that you see in capital markets today exists because of contingency processes. We've built a lot of that around the world. And the reason why we built this is because of trust, right? A lot of our business is based on trust and the fact that we can't fail. So and if you look at system design, like, you know, you look at the space shuttle, I've mentioned this example before, you have 4 redundant flight controls. That's not very efficient, but you do it because it's mission critical. So you come in here and you say, let's take away all the inefficiencies, and you basically end up with a more fragile system. So you really have to think about the architecture and what you're trying to do, because some of the inefficiencies that the fintechs perceive as bad are actually fail-safes that guard the market. And these act as shock absorbers to adverse events, adverse market conditions. So you really have to look at it holistically and not just say, you know, let's take out all the inefficient processes and we'll have a beautiful new world. That's not true. You may have adverse outcomes based on what you have built. And not just that, you may have to develop a new risk model, right? And you may have to have a new regulatory regime, right? Because if you look at the current regulatory regime, is very disclosure based, right? It's after the fact. So to deploy a lot of these real time technologies, we have to almost go into an event driven regulation. Are we ready for that? No, we're not. SGX is a regulator as well. I look at a lot of our systems, the way we regulate listed companies. We really have to think harder as to how we want to improve this market together, right? So there's no right or wrong answer, but there are definitely lessons that we can learn, and how do we apply this technology in a manner in which actually benefits the ecosystem. And the answer is not as simple as it seems, right? So we should work together on that. And I think, and we should work with like-minded people who are willing to engage and be critical and, you know, continue to push the technology ahead. So that's my view.
Can I ask a follow-up question, Peter? Just around, I think you sort of touched on there not being one blockchain to rule them all. I suppose also one of the things that we found quite interesting about the bond issuance application that has been created is that different functionalities were produced by SGX versus HSBC, and I wanted to ask your view on the interoperability between different smart contract applications, or the composability of them. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, okay. Basically, I think if you think about what a smart contract actually is, right? You're basically automating, you're doing some stored routines, right? And you're automating it at the data level. So when you get into that space, what the smart contract allows you to do, which has not been really possible before, because in the past, we've just been digitalizing data. We haven't really gone into rights and obligations. So what the smart contract allows you to do is to work with your partners in a particular transaction and say, look, these are the 5 steps that need to be done. I'll work on these 5 steps. You work on those 6 steps. And we can decide the handoffs and how do we kind of programmatically deploy it in a very meaningful way. So I think the smart contract component, if you look at blockchain, is not a monolithic technology, right? A lot of the vendors want to try and sell you a monolithic piece, right? I think it's more than that. There are parts of blockchain that smart contracts, the consensus mechanism, all the zero trust and all the stuff that has to do with distribution. But on the upstream side of it, I think there's a lot of value in adopting a smart contract paradigm in software development, which is very different from the way currently software is designed. Of course, there are elements that will be the same, the wrappers, the front end, the back end, and things like that. But the way it's done, right, the way we the way we build the application from user story to final product is very different. Like for Hash, I think it's the first pipeline software development CI/CD pipeline that I managed to do between 3 companies in 3 time zones, right? So it's been quite an enlightening journey for me as well. It's not that it's not done today, but I think with it's a much deeper level of collaboration which we've been able to achieve, and I think we all I think HSBC and us, we came away, we're much better for having gone through it. I think we have learned a lot along the way about ourselves as well, about how we approach certain things, right? So, like, it's not easy to get the info security across 2 different banks, let alone one bank, right? So I have a huge stack of forms to fill. They have forms to fill. We fill them out, and it was a good journey together of learning, and then we gave the feedback. And I think hopefully this will form a pattern for engagement with the industry, that we can adopt this approach of really driving change in a meaningful way, rather than having like large consortiums and having 3 active partners and having the complexity of managing that. We've managed to figure out some parts of it. So I think that's how we would answer that question. And yes, Daniel is very good for that.
That's a great way to finish. Irfan, coming to you. You talked about what developers are looking for from their blockchain technology, from the distributed applications that they're building. Can you talk to us about why you think interoperability matters in the context of the BSN? Why do developers care? Okay.
First, for interoperability matters not only for blockchain technology, not only for BSN, it matters for all the IT system, IT information technology. Okay, for example, the telephone, it need to reach all the people in the world. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense. Even internet, it hasn't reached all the people yet. Okay, and I always consider the first human information technology is speaking, okay, language. Okay, and after 300,000 years, it hasn't reached true interoperability yet. Okay, most people don't understand most people in the world. So that's why, first, I think interoperability is the most important aspect for any information technology. Second one is interoperability is always work in progress. Okay, there's no end. So that's why it's for example, for internet, why internet becomes so powerful? If we are still the intranet, okay, and we if that's the case, we don't have so many applications, so many websites, so many new business models. The reason is internet connecting all the data from different country, different industry, different company, different information systems, and combine them together. That really make the innovations happen. So the same reason for blockchain technology, same reason for the concept of BSN is we want connect all the data from different, not only for blockchains, it's also for the traditional information system, and connect them in a new way to transmit the data in a new way. By taking advantage of the blockchain technology, DLT technology, so make the data flows in a even more efficient way than internet. So that's why I truly believe the one goal of BSN is to provide as cheap and as convenient as possible, to give the developer different ways to for interoperability to get data from different system, and in order for them to build a much better system, much better technology, much better business model.
John, I believe you're on mute.
Again, I'm so sorry, everybody. I'm back again. Irfan, you talked a little bit earlier about how you're thinking about achieving interoperability with the BSN. Could you talk specifically about what you're doing with smart contracts to achieve that?
Okay, it's a long conversation. First, it's because just like I said, BSN is integrating all the framework. Okay, we already integrated 5 major permission framework and 12 public chains. So each framework, each public chain has their own programming language. to basically how to do the smart contracts. So right now right now on BSN. Okay, let me say this. For interoperability, we actually give them 4 categories. We call that gateway interoperability. Basically, through gateway, you get data from one chain and through to another chain. So that's also interoperability, but it's not secure enough. It's not efficient enough. So we call the second one is the layer 2 interoperability. Basically, through smart contract, through relayers, through that's actually what Cosmos is doing, Polkadot is doing. And that's what we call that layer 2, okay? And the third one we call that layer 1 interoperability, which means you have to modify the framework, okay, and make them share the same protocol and for data flows. And what BSN is really achieving is we call that layer 0 interoperability, which means you can just focus on your own smart contract. You don't need to worry about how to communicate with another chain. And we provide a system level protocol for any smart contract to call. And also within BSN, we give addresses to every single chain and every single smart contract on any chain. So it's just like internet. You have an address system. So you can, from your smart contract, you can know which chain you want to call and which smart contract on that chain you want to call. So that's why it's what we want to do is we call that to achieve a true interoperability for blockchain technology. But for that side, it's what we want is for developers focus on their smart contract. Okay, focus on the smart contract, and that's why why we select Demo as our BSN's exclusive programming language for smart contract, because we want because there are so many framework on BSN, so we want developers has one choice, as demos. So when they program one smart contract, they can deploy to any chain, because every single chain has their own capabilities. So basically we want to offer a developer just one time do a smart contract, and you can try all the frameworks, which one works best for your business scenarios.
Excellent. Thank you, Yifan. Peter, when we're talking about technology, it's not just about interoperability, is it? It's about access to the technology. I wanted to ask you a little bit about what do you think about open source and what that means for the future of capital markets. How interoperable are things if they're proprietary and closed?
Okay, so I think so if this is a question about specific to open source, okay, I'll answer it this way. I think open source is a very good way to create a developer community. All right, and one thing that you need for a lot of these technologies to reach mainstream is you have to have a bunch of developers. Right, I'm very cognizant of this, is the fact that given a business problem to solve, I will pick the most inexpensive, well understood, and mature technology to achieve it. If I were to pick a boundary use case, I may try an emerging technology. But given the current climate and the current situation, I think the appetite for trying an emerging technology, which could be very expensive, is lower. So it depends on your role, right? So I used to be the head of innovation for the group. In that role, yes, I would try emerging technologies. Now I have to actually deliver platforms. So my view is slightly different. My run rate with my bosses is slightly different. I have to deliver actual value. So then it's a different conversation. Going back to the open sourcing, this is something that I have debated at forums before. I think the question is, how much support do you need for an application that you build in order to deliver value for your clients? And that is the answer that every organization needs to make. So if you're a massive organization like a big bank, and you have the resources and the depth to take an open source technology, use it, fork it, build it, then that's a viable approach. If you're not in that category, then you have to really think about using an open source software, whether if it's inexpensive, that's great, but you will need to look at a support model. This will be like Cloudera, and I think you guys are familiar with the examples out there, or even Red Hat, right? Linux is an open source operating system, but most people would take a support contract for the Red Hat flavor or the Ubuntu flavor, simply because there's a layer of support at the enterprise level for things you do not want to worry about as an enterprise. So you really have to be very judicious in this, in a sense that, and putting on CIO hat, basically saying, if I have an open source technology, how do I support my clients in a meaningful way? If that means I have to get into a support contract with a partner, then I have to do it. If not, that means staffing up a technology team to take the code, run it, build the full SDLC process, CI/CD, so be it. But I think a lot of the fintechs, which some of them which I'm advising, don't realize that there's no free lunch in the world. You pick something good off of GitHub, and that's great. The moment you have live customers around it, you're going to have to build your own ITSM process to support your customers, because if you can't do that, they'll ditch you very quickly, right? And that's the end of your platform, right? So open source as a movement is great. In fact, I always recommend that software, given the choice between proprietary and open source software, and having the same cost, I will pick the open source. But what comes next is something that we need to really decide. Is it something that, how do I support it? Right? Do I have processes to look at vulnerabilities? Nowadays, software has to live on a steady diet of patches, simply because we live in a world where there's a lot of threats. Who's going to manage those patches? Right? It's an operational mindset that goes beyond just putting out a POC or MVP, which unfortunately is the case for many of these projects. And many of them will not see the light of day simply because these have not been considered. Right? So that's my take on open source. It's a long topic, I think, but that's my perspective. And I think in order to build some meaningful commercial platforms off of that, you really have to think about how you want to support it. Right. So all I support open source, but think about the support model. Okay, cool.
Jesslyn, coming to you, I just wanted to talk about the decision-making process inside Deutsche Bank around the smart contract language choice of DAML that you arrived at. Like, how did you get there?
Yeah, so first of all, we used the open source version to try it out, just really test out the application. But then looking back, right, it's also not just about the application, because from a vendor perspective, we really wanted to choose a partner like DAML who truly understands financial services and not just a software provider, and particularly in the industry, securities industry, because not many players out there really understands what's happening in the securities industry. And very importantly, a partner like DAML who is committed to driving business values and business outcomes. So that was actually very important for us. So from an application perspective, definitely the ease of deployment, the flexibility, the way we are able to be agile, and the easy path to migration really calls out to us. Because if you think back about what I shared earlier about try and error, learn on the journey, the ease of using some of these tools, particularly with the developer toolkit, was extremely important for our developers to sort of try out some of the solutions, right? And I also believe that if you fail early, that will benefit us rather than failing very late in the game and having very complex processes. So with that, and also with demo working towards addressing the interoperability, that's actually very important because that's the end state that we want to get to. And so that it allows us to sort of focus on optimizing the processes that we have rather than us being bound by a lot of infrastructure considerations. Yeah. So that was actually why we chose demo. And also more recently in Deutsche Bank, we announced the partnership with Google, and definitely the demo application is one of the first few applications that we want to move into the cloud platform because we believe in getting the advantage and harnessing all the synergies from the cloud platform that can actually bring for us. So that's actually some of the consideration that we had when we actually chose demo as the vendor that we want to partner and work with in building out the solution.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Jesselyn. Yifan, you touched about different types of interoperability before. I wanted to change gears a little bit and just talk about risk in technology choices for developers on the BSN. Where do you think the risk exists for people that are setting out on the journey to build distributed apps today? And do you think interoperability is the answer to protecting people from that? I think you might be on mute, Yifan.
Yeah. First, for developers, I don't really see interoperability as a risk for them. I think it's always good, for developers to try different things and to connect the different systems, but I think the risk for the different type of interoperability is there's so many new things in the blockchain technology, and one risk is when a developer spends 3 months, 5 months to learn a new programming language or interoperability methods, and after 2 years nobody will use it and it washed up. And I think that's actually one major reason, for us to adopt demo. Okay, as a uniform programming language on BSN. So we don't want people, because we are integrating all kind of framework, and we even see new framework coming out, with their own virtual machine. Okay, which means it require a new programming language. So we don't want developers, to spend a lot of time to learn something, won't be even useful in 3 years. So that's why we encourage our developers to learn demo programming language. Okay, and at the same time we will basically integrating demo to all the framework we already integrate. It's a huge work. Okay, the digital asset team is working on that, and the BSM team is working on that, and all the framework team is working on that. So that's I truly think, for all the developers, no matter which framework you want to use, and we also encourage you to use the language you are good at, but at the same time we encourage you to also learn demo. Okay, because it's one language will serve you for next 10 years, 20 years. Okay, and it will save you a lot of time.
Great. Thank you, Yifan. Mandy, I want to finish up with you. I suppose for BNP Paribas Security Services, you're bridging across Asia Pacific and of course around the world. But sure. I wanted to ask about, from a technology choice perspective, for people that are operating within the capital markets of today, how much do the choices of market infrastructures impact the choices of custodians? How much do the choices of custodians impact others? Like, standardization is quite important in security services, isn't it?
It is. You're very spot on this. So as you know, John, we have chosen to work with Demo for building our smart election platform. So the smart contracts for our smart contract solution. So as discussed earlier, it is very important that we do not develop a bespoke solution tied to a certain platform, but use a solution that is scalable and interoperable to bring benefits to a wider market that we serve. And as Peter said, there should always, of course, the consideration for security, integrity, and risk management when it comes to adopting a new technology that we have today. So at BNP Paribas, we connect our clients with the markets they trade, which is basically all around the world. So naturally, we've been actively participating in the shift to smart contract technologies across Asia Pacific. So what Singapore Exchange, Australian Exchange, and the Hong Kong Exchanges are doing with demo was a very important indicator for us to see where the market and technology are moving when it comes to smart contract adoption for security services. And then we also see more and more the changes in the legacy generation of post-trade technology to a new generation of post technologies, and more often than not interconnected with smart contracts. So it is a key for us to understand and adopt actually this gold standard for financial market smart contracts to ensure that we efficiently and in a scalable manner develop our smart contract solutions, and also give us the opportunity to cooperate with other market actors in the future for developing smart contract solutions. So as I said, that's one of the thought process kind of we went through as an organization when we chose to work with demo.
Perfect. And with that, I want to say a big thank you to the Singapore FinTech Festival for having us all on today, and a particular thank you to Peter, Mandy, Jesslyn, and Yifan. Hopefully what we've provided for you all today, and for anybody watching after the event, is some context about what 4 very different organizations are doing to realize value from smart contract applications, the thoughts that they've had, the pitfalls that they've hit, and the lessons that they've learned on their journey towards production with these types of applications, as well as the kinds of things that you need to keep in mind when you're making your technology choices. And so with that, thank you everybody for joining us today, and we hope you have a great festival.
Thanks, John.
Thank you so much, John.
Thank you all.